Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. Silence isn't weakness, it isn't avoidance, it isn't indifference, it's strength, discipline, and emotional clarity disguised as stillness. When you choose silence instead of chasing, explaining, or proving your worth, you shatter the illusion that the avoidant person holds any real control over your emotions. Avoidant people thrive in uncertainty. They pull you close just enough to keep your attention, then withdraw to maintain power. It's not always malicious, it's often fear. Fear of intimacy, fear of vulnerability, fear of losing autonomy. But what they rely on most is your reaction. Your pursuit feeds their comfort. Your words reassure them that they're still the center of your emotional world. And that's how the illusion is built. They run and you follow. But the moment you stop running, when you go quiet, their illusion starts to crumble. Silence forces them to sit in the very thing they've been avoiding, the discomfort of losing emotional control. Suddenly, they can't predict your next move. They can't rely on your validation to feel secure. They begin to wonder if they've miscalculated, if they've pushed too far, if you've finally seen through the pattern. Silence doesn't scream revenge, it whispers self-respect. It says, I won't compete for someone who's not choosing me. It says, my peace matters more than your confusion. And in that moment, you're not just breaking their illusion, you're rewriting your own story. You're no longer the one reacting to their distance, you're the one setting the tone. This silence isn't about manipulation. It's about alignment. It's about creating space for truth to reveal itself. Because when you stop chasing someone who keeps running, you finally see whether they ever intended to turn around. In the stillness, something beautiful happens, you grow. You start to hear your own thoughts instead of their mixed signals. You recognize your own worth instead of begging for breadcrumbs. You stop trying to fix what was never yours to fix, and that's when the power shifts, not toward domination, but toward liberation. Silence becomes your boundary. It becomes your declaration that you no longer need to speak to be understood. You simply need to stand in your truth and let that truth speak for you. So the next time an avoidant person pulls away, don't rush to fill the gap with explanations or apologies. Let silence do the work, because silence isn't empty. It's full of answers. It's the sound of you taking your power back. Silence is often misunderstood as weakness, as if saying nothing means you've given up or surrendered. But in truth, silence can be one of the most powerful tools of emotional mastery. It's the quiet voice that says, I don't need to prove myself to be heard. Choosing silence in moments of emotional turbulence isn't avoidance. It's an act of inner strength. It's knowing that your peace of mind is more valuable than any argument, explanation, or attempt to be understood by someone who has already decided not to listen. When you stop chasing validation, you stop giving away your power. Silence becomes your way of saying, I know my worth, and I won't waste it trying to convince someone else. When you're dealing with someone who constantly pulls away, someone who needs space, control, or distance to feel safe, your instinct might be to close the gap, to talk, to fix things. But the moment you resist that urge and choose quiet instead, something profound shifts. Silence tells the other person that you are not dependent on their response for your stability. It's a statement that your emotional balance comes from within, not from their approval or attention. It's the calm in the storm, a stillness that unsettles anyone who's used to controlling the narrative through withdrawal or mixed signals. They expect you to fill the silence with fear, to chase clarity, to beg for connection. But when you don't, their sense of control begins to unravel. Your silence becomes louder than any words could ever be. It speaks of confidence and self-assurance. It says you've learned that arguing for your value is a battle you'll always lose, because true worth is not something you can convince someone to see. It's something you embody. Silence is that embodiment. It's the energy of a person who knows they no longer need to explain their intentions or justify their feelings to someone unwilling to meet them halfway. It's the quiet power that comes when you choose dignity over desperation. Silence also creates space for you to observe rather than react. In that pause, you see the situation for what it really is. You start noticing patterns instead of getting pulled into them. You realize how much energy you've spent trying to decode someone's mixed messages, and how liberating it feels to just stop engaging in that dance. When you choose silence, you take yourself out of the emotional tug-of war. You stop handing the rope to someone who only pulls when it suits them. You stop participating in the illusion that your reaction determines your worth. It's not easy to stay silent when your heart wants to speak. It takes maturity, patience, and deep self-trust, but that's what makes it powerful. It's restraint born of awareness. It's emotional intelligence in action, the kind of silence that doesn't come from suppression but from strength, the kind that says, I could explain myself, but I don't need to. In that quiet, you stop being a character in someone else's story and start writing your own. Silence becomes your boundary, your declaration of self-respect, and your proof that real power doesn't always roar, it sometimes whispers. Avoidant individuals often build their sense of emotional safety around control. They manage their relationships by deciding when to engage and when to withdraw, keeping the other person in a constant state of uncertainty. That unpredictability gives them power. It allows them to dictate the rhythm of connection while staying protected from emotional vulnerability. The more you react to their distance, the more control they feel. Every time you chase, question, or plead for clarity, it reinforces their illusion that they can control not just the relationship, but your emotional state. They thrive on the reassurance that no matter how much they pull away, you will still be there waiting. But this dynamic only works when you play your part. When you stop reacting, when you no longer feed their pattern with attention or emotional pursuit, the entire structure begins to fall apart. Your silence takes away the energy that sustains their control. It leaves them with nothing to push against, nothing to measure their power by. The moment you stop responding to their inconsistency, you change the rules of the game. They can no longer rely on your reaction to feel secure, and suddenly they're left alone with the very anxiety they were trying to avoid. Your lack of reaction forces the avoidant person to confront something they've been running from, the realization that they don't actually hold the power they thought they did. When you no longer respond to their distance, their silence, or their sudden shifts, they start to see that the emotional leverage they once had no longer exists. For someone who fears losing control, that's deeply unsettling. They begin to question whether you've emotionally detached, whether they've misjudged your attachment, or whether you've finally outgrown the game. And while that may not change their core behavior immediately, it disrupts the comfort of their illusion. Silence doesn't mean punishment or manipulation. It's not about using absence as a weapon. It's about reclaiming your emotional autonomy. It's the conscious choice to no longer participate in a dynamic that drains your energy and keeps you stuck in confusion. When you choose not to react, you are effectively saying, I'm no longer available for this pattern. That boundary doesn't require words. It's communicated through calm, consistent stillness. And that stillness is powerful because it removes the avoidant's ability to feed on your emotional responses. In your silence, you stop being predictable. Predictability is what gives the avoidant person comfort. They know how to manage your reactions, how to draw you back in when they want attention, and how to push you away when they need control. When you step out of that pattern, you create mystery and emotional distance, not the kind that plays games, but the kind that reflects genuine independence. You begin to operate from a place of inner strength instead of emotional dependency. Ultimately, your silence becomes the turning point. It signals that you no longer exist in the relationship on their terms. You're no longer reacting to their fear with your anxiety. You've broken the emotional chain that kept you tethered to their cycle of control. And in that quiet disconnection, you gain the freedom they were trying so hard to maintain for themselves. When you choose silence in response to an avoidant person's withdrawal, it creates a kind of stillness they aren't equipped to handle. Avoidant individuals are used to controlling emotional dynamics through distance. They push away when intimacy feels too close, expecting the other person to chase, explain, or fight for connection. That pursuit gives them reassurance. They know you're still emotionally invested, still orbiting around them even when they pull back. But when you stop reacting and go silent instead, that comfort vanishes. Your stillness becomes a mirror that reflects their own fear of abandonment, something they spend their lives trying to avoid facing. Suddenly, they are left alone with the discomfort they've worked so hard to suppress. In that silence, the avoidant starts to lose their sense of control. They've been relying on your predictable reactions to maintain emotional balance. When you stop playing your part, their usual strategies no longer work. They can't soothe their anxiety by watching you chase after them, nor can they feel safe by keeping you at a distance. Your silence creates a vacuum, and in that vacuum, they start to feel the weight of uncertainty. It's unsettling for them because silence removes the validation that they've come to depend on. They begin to question whether you've finally detached, whether the emotional control they once held has slipped through their hands. Stillness has a unique power. It amplifies what's unspoken. The avoidant begins to project their own fears into the quiet you've created. Did they push too far? Have they lost you for good? Are you done trying? The very silence they once believed gave them power now becomes their source of anxiety. Because control for them isn't about love, it's about predictability. And when you take that away, you also take away their emotional safety net. They start to see that distance doesn't always lead to pursuit. Sometimes it leads to disconnection, and that realization can be jarring. This is where the real transformation begins, not just for them, but for you. Your silence is not revenge, it's a boundary. It teaches without confrontation. It communicates that you will not chase someone who repeatedly runs from intimacy. It tells them that you value peace over chaos, and that you're no longer willing to participate in emotional push and pull games. By not reacting, you remove their ability to manipulate the rhythm of the relationship. They can no longer dictate when connection happens or how much affection you give. That stillness resets the dynamic completely. At first, your silence may confuse them, then it may frustrate them, but eventually it commands respect. It shows emotional maturity and self-control, qualities the avoidant often struggles with internally. They begin to sense that you are no longer dependent on their attention to feel whole, and that recognition forces them to reflect on their own fears, their avoidance of closeness, and the cost of always needing control. In that space of discomfort, growth becomes possible because silence, though quiet, speaks the loudest truth. The person who remains calm holds the real power. Silence has a way of revealing truth that words often conceal. When you stop trying to explain yourself to an avoidant person, when you no longer chase them for reassurance or clarity, the dynamic between you begins to expose what it truly is. Avoidant people often create confusion as a shield. They use mixed signals, half-hearted communication, and emotional withdrawal to keep control while avoiding vulnerability. As long as you keep responding, as long as you keep trying to interpret or fix their behavior, they can hide behind the fog they've created. But when you go silent, that fog begins to lift. There's no reaction to feed their narrative, no emotional chase to blur the lines, no energy to sustain the illusion. In that stillness, the truth starts to emerge, and what's real becomes impossible to ignore. Silence works like a mirror. It reflects the true state of the connection. If the relationship is one-sided, your absence will make that clear. If the other person is emotionally unavailable, your quiet will expose how little effort they're truly willing to make. Without your constant engagement, you begin to see who steps forward and who disappears when the noise dies down. The avoidant silence, which once felt like control, starts to lose its power when it's met with yours. It's in that equilibrium that clarity is found. You no longer have to guess their intentions, their actions, or lack of them, tell you everything you need to know. This process can be uncomfortable because silence invites truth, and truth often disrupts the stories we tell ourselves. You might discover that the connection was built more on your hope than on their effort. You might realize that what you called chemistry was actually an emotional imbalance disguised as attraction. But as painful as those realizations can be, they are also liberating. The silence gives you space to see reality without emotional interference. It gives you a chance to observe the pattern rather than participate in it. You begin to understand that love isn't proven by how much you tolerate inconsistency. It's measured by how much peace you feel in someone's presence. For the avoidant, your silence is a confrontation with accountability. Without your words to distract them or your reactions to reassure them, they are left alone with the consequences of their distance. They have to face the emotional vacuum they've created. They can no longer pretend that their withdrawal keeps them safe. It simply isolates them. Some may double down on avoidance, retreating even further into their comfort zone, while others may begin to reflect and question why they push away what they actually desire. Either way, your silence forces honesty. It dismantles the illusion that they can control the connection without ever nurturing it. In this way, silence becomes more than just the absence of sound, it becomes the presence of truth. It reveals who values communication and who hides behind avoidance. It exposes whether the relationship is built on mutual care or emotional dependence. And most importantly, it reminds you that the truth doesn't always need to be spoken to be known. Sometimes it simply needs the quiet to be heard. Silence has a transformative quality. It doesn't just remove you from chaos, it restores you to yourself. When you choose stillness instead of reacting, you begin to reclaim emotional ground that you may not have realized you'd lost. Every unanswered text, every ignored call, every vague response from an avoidant person can pull you into a loop of confusion and self-doubt. You start questioning what you did wrong, replaying moments in your head, trying to decode mixed signals that were never meant to make sense. But the moment you stop engaging with that cycle and allow silence to settle in, you start to feel something powerful, peace. You're no longer burning energy trying to hold together something that only survives through your effort. Silence becomes a sanctuary, a space where you begin to hear your own voice again. In this silence, you realize that peace is not found in getting answers from the avoidant. It's found in accepting that you don't need them to heal. The control they once had over your emotions starts to dissolve the moment you stop giving their behavior meaning. They may continue to withdraw or send confusing signals, but your lack of reaction strips those gestures of their power. You are no longer a participant in the emotional tug-of-war. You're observing it from a distance with clarity instead of attachment. And that distance isn't coldness, it's wisdom. It's the recognition that your energy is precious and that investing it in someone who fears connection only keeps you stuck in their fear. As your silence continues, something deeper shifts. You begin to feel strong in your restraint. You start realizing that real confidence doesn't come from being chosen. It comes from choosing yourself. Silence becomes the practice of that self-commitment. It teaches you patience, emotional regulation, and the ability to sit with discomfort without needing to fix it. You start to see that peace isn't passive, it's powerful. It's the kind of strength that says, I don't need to chase what's running from me because what's meant for me won't hide. That realization marks the beginning of true emotional freedom. For the avoidant, your silence becomes a kind of mirror that reflects what they've been avoiding. the reality that control doesn't equal connection. When they see that you've stopped reacting, that you're no longer dependent on their validation, it unsettles them. They may feel confused, even threatened, by your calm detachment, because it represents something they can't easily influence. But that's not your concern anymore. Your focus has shifted from trying to fix them to protecting your peace. You've learned that silence doesn't just communicate boundaries, it enforces them. In that space of quiet, you reconnect with your inner stability. You no longer look for closure from someone who benefits from keeping things open-ended. You stop asking why they don't change and start focusing on how you can grow. Your silence becomes an act of healing, not withdrawal, a quiet revolution of self-worth. It's the moment you realize that you never lost your power, you were simply giving it away. And now, in your stillness, you've taken it back. In the end, silence isn't about walking away in bitterness. It's about walking back to yourself in peace. It's the moment you realize that your worth doesn't depend on who notices your absence, but on how deeply you honor your own presence. When you stop chasing those who run and start listening to your quiet strength, you discover that silence was never emptiness, it was clarity. Thank you for listening, for showing up for your growth, and for choosing peace over confusion. May your silence always speak the loudest truth about your power.